Afternoon, everyone. We have a few people still joining us, and I'm sure some people are well on their way. I'm Tracy Sullivan, the Executive Director of the Australian Council of Graduate Research, and I'd like to welcome you all here today for our second webinar of 2025, focusing on becoming a principal supervisor and exploring the fast track option. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm coming to you from today, the Darug people, and pay respect to their elders past and present. I'd also like to extend that respect to the traditional owners of the lands that you're joining us from, and welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here on this webinar with us today. We're really fortunate to have with us today the four esteemed colleagues who work in the graduate research space. We have Associate Professor John Rees, who's the Director of Research and Training at the University of Technology, Sydney, who's going to chair our session and discussion with you today. We have Professor Pierre Benkendorf, who's the Deputy Dean of the Graduate School and a Professor in the School of Business at the University of Queensland. Professor Wendy Wright is the Dean of the Graduate School at Federation University. And we also have Associate Professor Deborah Strickland, who's the coordinator of the Principal Supervisor Accreditation Program at Edith Cowan University. So some very experienced individuals with a great deal of knowledge and expertise in this area. So as to not waste any important discussion time, I'll hand over now to Associate Professor John Rees, who's going to chair this discussion for us today. Thank you, John.
Very much, Tracy, and thanks for this opportunity, and also for your leadership of the ACGR as its Executive Director. Thanks to everyone for jumping on in our busy lives, and this is an important discussion we feel to have, so thank you for joining this community of practice conversation. Universities are defined most fundamentally as institutions of research. In many contexts, including in my own here at UTS, high degree research candidates are key contributors to research volume, research quality, research ranking. HDR supervisors become those, if you like, hinge professionals that open the door for graduate researchers to make their mark as contributors to new knowledge and innovation. The capacity of universities to provide enough qualified principal or senior supervisors is therefore a key factor in growing an HDR program and unlocking the many benefits that I guess come with this. Today's webinar focuses on the specific lever of fast track or accelerator pathways, whereby early and mid-career researchers can meet the institutional qualification of principal supervisor in less than a full candidature period. How do such programs work? Are there different models to consider? Are there risks in shortening the pathway to full supervisor accreditation? And if so, how can those risks be mitigated? Beyond the goal of HDR growth, equally, what benefits to research culture and impact might come with this fast track option? As Tracy indicated, I'm joined by three leaders in graduate research, and colleagues, thank you for your time and your generosity to share your thoughts here. To set the scene, could I begin by asking each of you to briefly offer a profile of graduate research at your respective institutions, what it looks like, scale, other things that you thought about when thinking about this issue of graduate researcher profile. Wendy, could we begin with you?
Sure, thank you. Hi, colleagues. For those who don't know me, I'm Wendy Wright. I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Federation Uni. Federation University is a very small regional university in Victoria. We have multiple campuses right across the state. I'm based in the east on Gunai-Kurnai country, otherwise known as Gippsland. So we're looking at a small but diverse HDR cohort, around 300 active students at any particular time, maybe 320. So we don't have the economies of scale of some of the larger universities, particularly if you think about economies of scale within disciplines. And one example of that is that we don't have depth of supervision sometimes, depending on which discipline that we're talking about. I think another feature of FED and the graduate research environment at FED is that we've really very much centralised HDR. So we have a single central grad school, which I lead, that coordinates all aspects of HDR candidature and administration. We even buy out the supervision time from, we call them institutes, equivalent of faculties. And so we manage the supervisors. We second HDR coordinators into the grad school to support students by discipline cohorts. We manage HDR office space across the whole university, all campuses. We manage their research funding allowances. We manage the industry partnerships for HDR, including internships, but also co-funded projects. I think that's about it for the HDR context at FED. Thanks, John.
Fantastic. Thank you, Wendy. Pierre, you're at the University of Queensland. Over to you.
Thanks, John. Just let me share these slides. Hopefully everybody can see those. I'm a visual person, so I thought it'd be better to put a lot of the details on a slide. And before I talk about UQ, I just wanted to set the stage by talking a bit about what the national requirements are, because I think they're relevant to this conversation. And the national requirements are on the screen from the Higher Education Standards Framework. They essentially say that each student should be supported by continuing supervisory arrangements, including a principal supervisor who holds a doctoral degree. That's not negotiable, or has equivalent research experience. I guess that's where a bit of the grey area comes in. Is active in research and publishing, which does eliminate some people from being able to be a principal supervisor, otherwise making original contributions. They also say at least one associate supervisor. So the national framework is really set up or predicated on this idea of supervision in teams, and presumably that's to spread the risk if one supervisor departs the institution. The principal advisor is a member of staff, so on. So I think it's just important to highlight here that the HESF places responsibility on institutions to ensure supervisors are competent and supported. Many providers then interpret these requirements to mean that principal supervisors should have a track record of successful research supervision and completions. But that's not the case. You can see there in the framework that there's no further specification around how much experience those supervisors have. And so that very much informs our approach at UQ, which I'll talk about in a minute. But just to set the stage, we have about 4,500 HDR candidates at any one time, and about 3,000 principal advisors who are on our principal advisor register. So lack of supervisor capacities is not a problem for us at UQ. We've got plenty of supervisors. In fact, most of our supervisors complain that they can't get enough students. And I guess that wouldn't be unusual for a research-intensive university. 45% of them are international, 53% are female, 94% are doing a Doctor of Philosophy, and most of the others are doing a Master of Philosophy, and 78% are full-time. Like Wendy, we have a central grad school that coordinates the program and is responsible for the governance, but we are not responsible for the supervisors. The supervisors report back to their local schools and faculties. So the way that we manage this issue, the simple response to John's question is that we don't have an accelerator program because we don't need one, and the reason is that we don't exclude ECRs or EMCRs from being principal advisors at UQ. So the only eligibility requirement is that they're continuing fixed term or honorary academic staff. So they could be early or mid-career researchers. The accountability bit comes in because in their annual academic performance and development process, they have a conversation about their teaching, their research, their citizenship, but also their supervision. At UQ, we have 4 pillars, and they are teaching, research, supervision and mentoring, and citizenship, which makes the need to have a conversation with your head of school around supervision much more explicit, because you can't really dodge around it and hide it under one of the other pillars. We have a principal advisor register, as I've said before, and to be on that register, a principal advisor needs to undertake about 4 hours of training every 5 years. So that training component to make sure that supervisors are up to speed with the policies and procedures, but also what's happening in the national landscape and what some of the strategic drivers are, is a very important part of that model. We also have some workload requirements set around that, which are a little bit tangential to this conversation, but I think they are an important lever that universities have to manage the quality of supervision and the attention that students receive from their supervisors. And then the whole thing is underpinned by mentorship. So following that higher education standards framework advice, our view is that if a principal advisor is less experienced, so if their EMCR maybe hasn't completed a student, they are still eligible to be a principal advisor, but our policy requires them to be paired with an experienced associate advisor, so another researcher who is more experienced, who can then serve as a mentor as part of the broader team. So that's a little bit of background context about how we do it at UQ.
Yeah, we really can.
Sorry, John, you're muted. We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Pierre. We were really keen to get that cross-institutional variety and the confederation to UQ and the different economies of scale issues, and some of the cross-fertilisation as well. Adding to that, Edith Cowan University is another location that we can think about in this conversation. And over to you, Deb. Thank you.
Oh, hi, thanks. My name is Deb Strickland. I'm from ECU. I'm in the graduate research team there, headed by Chris Abbas. We do not have a centralised structure over at ECU. We have a graduate research team, and we have graduate research services, which house a lot of teams associated with graduate research, ethics, governance, integrity, that kind of thing. And then there are other teams located all over the university, really, scholarships teams and lots of other teams that contribute to graduate research. ECU is a relatively young, small university. There's the focus has predominantly been on teaching over its life, but there has been now a growing focus and strategy to grow the research at ECU. And of course, with that comes the issues of capacity and capability. I think we, in terms of our ratio of supervisors to candidates, we're on the low side. If we benchmark across other universities, we're on, again, we have some potential capability and capacity issues. We currently have about 800 to 900 HDR candidates. We have multiple campuses that they exist across. Predominantly, those 800 to 900 HDR candidates are PhD. What else? We have a supervisor register that all supervisors must be a member of before they can perform supervisory roles. At ECU, there are 2 ways to achieve principal supervisory roles. One of them is a completion, and we have also another program which is called the Principal Supervisor Accreditation Program, which is a 1-year program. And on completion of that, supervisors can take on those principal supervisor roles. Renewals every 4 years for us, and there are set criteria to renew, including professional development, research activity, and a few other things you have to fill in. And to get on the register in the first place, you have to do a 4-hour induction program, and you are given, you are assigned a level appropriate to your expertise and where you sit in your current career. That's probably enough context to move on with.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Deb. A few people offering comments on the quality of my sound. I'm sorry, as we're going along, I'm trying to fix that one up. So thank you very much. We will keep the conversation going for our panelists, however, and just want to ask, in the approach that your institution is taking when it comes to supervisor accreditation, what can you see, if any, are the risks in this approach? And have you got an eye to other activities in the sector that can help inform that? Accelerator programs particularly might be in view here. So if an institution has decided not to adopt an accelerator program, was that on the basis of risk or on the basis of something else? Equally, where risks might exist more broadly, how can they be mitigated? I'll throw it open to the panel.
I'm happy to jump in if that works.
Thanks, Wendy.
I might quickly just say what we do at FED in terms of an accelerator program. So, of course, the grad school manages the supervisor register, and as I mentioned before, we do struggle with depths of supervision in some disciplines. So we have categories of supervision. I'm sure everybody else does. In our world, we call them principal supervisor, associate supervisor, and then of course we have external supervisors as well. Just going to focus on principal and associate for now. They're our two Federation University staff members, if you like. So to be registered as a Federation University supervisor, they need to be a staff member at greater than 0.5 FTE. They don't have to have an ongoing appointment. They have to, at the time of appointment to a supervisory panel, have a contract that is longer than the duration of the proposed candidature. But really the distinction, they have to meet threshold requirements in terms of, as we just saw, and thanks Pierre for showing those requirements from the HESF. The distinction for us between associate and principal is that to be a principal supervisor, we want to have seen them complete a candidate previously. And we've sort of hung on to that, even though it's not explicitly a requirement of the HESF. What we're doing here at FED is trying to recognise the value of that apprenticeship model, whereby an ECR or somebody who's new to supervision can supervise alongside an experienced supervisor in order to attain principal supervisor status. But because we don't have the depth of supervision in some disciplines, we need a fast track. And for us, the way we've done that, we've invented two new categories of supervisor. So we've got our principal and our associate. We also have provisional principal supervisor and mentor supervisor. So if it's often that the grad school needs to find a supervisor, perhaps to replace somebody who's left the university or whatever it is. We may appoint somebody who doesn't quite meet the requirements to register as a principal supervisor, but they're keen, they're open to training, and they have found themselves a mentor supervisor. So that's how we manage it. So they're not meeting the requirements for the principal supervisor in their own right, and that's usually because they don't have a completion. By the way, it's really common in the clinical health and allied health areas where we've appointed a lot of people into the academy from clinical backgrounds. They may have their own PhD quite recently, but they don't have the supervision experience. So we pair them up with a mentor supervisor. The role of the mentor supervisor is not to work with the candidate, but to work with the supervisory team. And so I guess that's the way that we handle it. The risk of that particular solution to that particular problem is around when the mentor is just too hands-off. You know, they sign up, agree to be mentor, but then they don't, you know, do anything. But the benefits, I think, is that when it's working, the mentor supervisor actually gains some research leadership experience, and they gain recognition within the university. You know, it's a bit of a gold star if you're appointed as a mentor supervisor and people recognise that that's somebody who the grad school has recognised meets the requirements for a mentor supervisor. I think that's perhaps everything. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Wendy. Deb.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. Sorry.
Yeah, please.
So I think it's worthwhile considering some of the risks associated with the model of apprenticeship, if you like. I like that word, Wendy. That's great. You know, the 4-year. So obviously time is a huge challenging factor in here. There's also elements I'm going to call luck of the draw in terms of the student, the candidate, and the team you end up supervising. There are many contextual things that, you know, you can have challenging students, you can have a dreams candidate and don't actually get to experience any of the challenging situations that others may. So it's restricted in one way in the actual supervisor team and candidate that you end up supervising and learning from. There's also, I don't know that we actually record or assess the roles that our apprentices play in supervisor panels. So it's challenging to kind of figure out exactly what they've learned. There's no metrics that are associated with how well they're going to perform after that journey. So that said, I think I'll speak a little bit about the Principal Supervisor Accreditation Program as a variant to the conversation. So the acronym I'm going to use is PSAP for that. So I'll give you a brief history, just very brief. It was started in 2016, and I'll acknowledge Dr. Joe Luca, Dr. Cecily Butt in instigating the program. And it ran until 2021, and I think it was stopped due to COVID things. In that time, they had 120 participants. There was a 90% success rate, and unsuccess was associated with either withdrawal or not handing in the assessments. Now, this is not a light-hearted program, so I kind of don't know that I like the words fast-tracked or that kind of thing, because this has a significant commitment from both the participants in the program and those delivering the program. So a brief overview, what does it look like? We re-established it in 2024, and it was coordinated by Kate Howe, and I started at ECU in the back half of 2024 and have taken over it in 2025 running the program. A little bit about the program. It runs over about 9 months of a year. Participants have to attend 8 3.5-hour workshops delivering different content. They have to participate in 8 mentor meetings. They have to create a reflection journal that reflects on all of those workshops and all of those mentor meetings, and that journal is assessed. They have to create a supervision tool, give a presentation, and their reflections have to include relevant literature. It is a substantial piece of work, and depending on content, there is an awful lot of PD in there that they're exposed to in a 9-month. It's also about setting up a cohort, a community, networking. There are a lot of other things. I can delve into content if you'd like to. You know, the risks are non-attendance. There's also a financial concern for the institution. Capacity, the course is usually tailored for a restricted number of individuals, because I think it's really important to develop that community, and networking and sharing and truth telling, developing a shared understanding is far better delivered in a smaller group. Yeah, so if anyone wants, I can delve into the content. So I'll stop speaking now, and I can delve into the benefits after others have talked about their risks, if you like.
Thank you very much, Deb. There's some fantastic chat going on in the chat as well, some active Q&A. So thank you so much for your contribution to that. And Pierre, from your perspective, any risk factors that can be mitigated in the approach that UQ takes in its supervisor accreditation pathway?
Yeah, thanks, John. So as I said, we don't really have an accelerated pathway, but I guess we do. We just don't call it that because somebody straight out of their PhD can be a principal advisor, provided they've done the training and are accompanied by a more experienced associate advisor to serve as a mentor. But there are some problems with that. One is that even with that model, supervisors might lack exposure to the full research candidature cycle that you normally would experience if you wait until you've supervised somebody through that full cycle. And as we know, different problems can come up at different stages in that cycle. That's mitigated to some extent by having an experienced associate advisor there as a mentor, but then all of that responsibility falls to the more experienced advisor on the team, and there is some risk there that those more experienced advisors are often more senior researchers who are perhaps not as well across all of the relevant policies and procedures or the latest good practice in supervision. So there's a risk that that the mentee is learning bad habits from some of these associate advisors, and that's something that we come across occasionally with our model, that it's certainly something to be aware of. So it's also important that those mentees, those experienced researchers that are providing the support, are empowered to do that and are also up to speed with what the latest approaches are to supervision. I might stop there, I think, because the other two speakers already covered off on some of the other points.
I'm wondering, Pierre, if we could snake back to you and then address our other colleagues as well, just in terms of the benefits of the mentoring model. So you've identified the risks. Beyond simply completions, from the wider researcher culture perspective, as you see it, what are the benefits to UQ for the mentor approach and allowing freshly minted colleagues in the academy to come in as principal supervisors under that mentoring umbrella?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of benefits. Obviously, increased supervision capacity, so it gives us a bigger pool of people that we can tap into to be principal advisors, particularly where some of our senior researchers might have maxed out their cap. It obviously gives the early and mid-career researchers an accelerated career progression pathway. So the really keen, motivated, up-and-coming rising stars allows them to really fast track their promotions because that principal advisor supervision experience is certainly a very important part of promotion at UQ. I think it also encourages innovation and more diverse supervisory approaches. I think some of our older researchers who are more experienced come with a particular mindset, if I can say that, where our younger researchers are a little bit more willing to experiment, perhaps a bit more innovative, particularly when it comes to things like methodology. So there's that benefit. I like to think that it also enhances the mentorship and collaborative research culture. So the supervision's not just about the relationship between the student and the supervisor, but also about the relationship between different supervisors on the team. And I experienced that myself. The idea of working with a diverse range of other people in my discipline to co-supervise students is something that I find really rewarding. It's often because of the conversations that happen between the researchers that are part of that supervision team. And I think it also supports staff retention. This is probably more institutional benefit, that we retain staff because we have a clear professional advancement pathways. People don't have to go elsewhere in order to get promoted or to move up a step.
Thank you very much for that, and lots to think about there. I'm particularly stimulated by the ways perhaps that the mentee can be the mentor, as it were, in that exchange, that often those at the cutting edge coming out of their own graduate research experience or at the start of an academic career are asking questions and facing challenges that are right where some of the sector is moving, and very stimulated by that, and how we can tap in and maximize and mine, if you like, that wealth of energy and insight and wisdom that's coming from those who are in the current arrangement, in many places seen as mentees. So yeah, thank you for that. Deb, the whole program linked to Edith Cowan and the PSAP initiative, wider benefits beyond the immediate goals of PSAP?
Yeah, can I answer one of the chat questions before I jump to that? So there are two pathways at ECU. You can still get to be principal supervisor by doing a completion. That's fine. That's whatever the journey is, 3 to 4 years. And then there is the PSAP, which is a separate pathway, which is very intense, but that's a year. So there are two options, and looking at mentor models as well as somewhere in between, I guess. So your question was about benefits. So the focus of PSAP at the moment is predominantly on two things. It is not about expert domain knowledge. What it is about is professional development, relationships, soft skills play a key thing that we're looking to engage people with, and also the policies and processes and the code of conduct, all of those things that are critical to good supervision. So we divide that up. So the benefits are in terms of we can take off some of these workshops and change them around a bit, offer them as PD to white staff, depending on what the interests and needs are. As I said, exposure to such a high amount of PD. As we all know, professional development is becoming increasingly important in our roles and responsibilities as supervisors. It's raising awareness of all of these things and getting people comfortable with looking at literature. Reflection's hugely, valuable in your practice as a supervisor, to avenues to build on your thing. I think giving young supervisors a solid framework is a real advantage, and they can, do it in a year. We've received a lot of positive feedback on all of those things from participants. The quality assurance, if you want to think about that, is the assessments, the presentations, the tool they have to develop, the community of practice that cohorts seem to develop together, the networks, the shared understanding of what best practice is and how we want to go about doing that, the behaviours that we want to establish at the university, the goals. They're all big benefits of PSAP. that I can see.
Thanks, Deb. You didn't mention it, but I'm going to mention it. ECU are also among our leaders in HDR student experience. And I can see that, you know, across the tapestry of offerings and the stages of experience from HDR through to principal supervision, everybody involved there, that those synergies are working very well. So thank you for sharing that. Wendy, you have indicated in the chat Federation's fortnightly webinars and a range of other initiatives. In thinking about these active support mechanisms, what are the wider benefits as you see it for Federation?
I think they're similar to what Deb has just explained about bringing everybody along with a shared vision of the kind of supervision behaviours we do and don't want to see. Often in these sorts of conversations, the elephant in the room is what I heard discussed at a former ACGR meeting a long time ago as the silverback supervisors. That, you know, they, as Pierre said, there are supervisors who have a particular view of how things should be done, and it may not be a particularly modern view or one that I, as the Dean, would necessarily agree with. And I think that the more we talk about what we do want to see, it becomes obvious what we don't want to see. So we try and talk a lot about what we do want to see in supervision. Of course, we have our formal training program. So we have an in-house skills for supervisors program. But beside that, we have this much more informal drop in, drop out. We call it sandwiches and supervision. So it's on at lunchtime. It's online because of the way our campuses are spread across the state. But, you know, people just sit down with their lunch and engage in a discussion. You know, we had, for example, last week somebody, you know, and supervisors present. It's not me telling them, it's them discussing. And last week we had somebody talking about supervising research in challenging spaces. And it was about emotionally challenging research. It was a really, really valuable discussion and had people thinking about psychosocial safety of their students, you know, all of that sort of stuff that is, it is a new conversation for some supervisors, and it provides a really good platform to have those conversations, I think.
Thank you very much. I should just say briefly that UTS has a supervisor registration approach which falls between some of the options that have been mentioned by colleagues here. Implicitly, there is a mentoring component for what we call category 2 supervisors who are not yet to a PhD or Masters by Research completion. And to that extent, they can, within a team, become a principal supervisor as long as a category 1 supervisor who has achieved a completion is present. And there's an implicit hope and understanding that there'd be a mentoring relationship through there. But technically, in contrast to the model that Pierre offered from UQ, no automatic pathway into principal supervision. So issues of time, issues of mentoring quality, and issues of the kind of training that we can wrap around that. In thinking about this topic, as has been borne out by many of your comments and many of the details of the chat, one single issue of supervisor accreditation opens up a range of other very important factors. And I think that the value of today's webinar is to think about the specifics of the tools and modes, particularly as ACGR, to Wendy's point on scale, economies of scale, different models that we're hearing today may be of real appeal depending on member contexts and the capacities that leaders within the graduate research space within our variety of contexts have. Equally, there'll be common themes on quality, reassurance, culture, dare I say, silverbacks, he says with his grey hair. there's a question of attending to very important issues that this conversation allows. And I really appreciate that we've started to open up some of those questions as well, including, of course, student experience at the centre of it all. Thank you to our panel for those starting comments. We've got a really well-attended webinar and so grateful for everyone's time. I just thought that we might just open it up for questions. There have been many questions that have occurred in the chat. If you're courageous enough to speak into the conversation directly, now is your chance. Please, if you can, perhaps do it by a raised hand so that we can have some a semblance of order and so that we don't miss anybody. Over to you. And JP, thank you. No problem. While JP's sorting out the audio, solidarity, I've had them as well today. Over to you, Dylan, and we'll keep you in mind, JP, when the audio is fixed. Thanks, Dylan.
How you going? I'm an ECR, and I just had recently had a student get in contact with me about being a principal supervisor, and I think it's fine from a Flinders University perspective, but I was just after your advice about navigating being an ECR and having an associate supervisor with much more experience and the dynamics of that relationship.
Over to the panel.
Yeah, look, there's a couple of issues to be aware of there. Certainly, ECRs tend to have a smaller profile, so it can be more difficult for them to attract students in the first place, and that's something that I think we need to recognise, that the playing field is not level. So it is great when you get a student approaching you to be a principal, but in this kind of model where ECRs are able to be principal supervisors, that they can sometimes struggle to attract students in the first place. There are also local cultures. So I know in some of the STEM areas at my university, there's still a very strong view that the lab leader or the team leader or the theme leader is the one that needs to be the principal advisor. And so the postdocs and the EMCRs often don't get a look in, just because there's that local culture that's just not the way things are done. Obviously, at the university level, our view is that those EMCRs can be principal advisors. So we don't have a huge problem with that. The power distance can be an issue, and I think that's what you're really alluding to there, is how do you manage the power dynamics within the team if the associate is a more senior academic, and I think it comes back to your relationships with or the relationship dynamics on the team. Sometimes that works really well. Other times it can be a disaster and much to the detriment of the student when it doesn't work well, because those power dynamics get in the way.
Thank you.
Can I jump in and just answer as well for Dylan,
Absolutely,
if that's okay?
Wendy, yeah.
It's a great question for me to hear, Dylan, because in my setup, if you came to me at Federation with a student who'd asked you to be their principal supervisor, I'd be having a conversation with you that went something like, not yet, which is really tough when I have to have those conversations, because, you know, the academic feels, I've brought this student to the university, why can't I be the principal supervisor? So we would be having a conversation if, you know, if that was the case. But to directly answer your question, I agree that it comes down to the relationship between yourself and the associate. And I think explicit conversations that actually identify that as a potential area of, if not conflict, then confusion. And I would strongly advocate that you discuss explicitly what the roles of each member of the supervisory team are. And then I'd review that. I'd have it written down and I'd review it every time there's a student milestone. I'd review what are the supervisors' roles, and I'd include the student. Once the supervisors have agreed, I'd include the student in the convo.
Okay, thank you.
Can I
Jane,
also
may I-
answer the question?
Hi, is it Hyla?
Hila.
Hi, Hila. How are you?
Good, thank you. I would like to answer Dylan, if that's okay, because he mentioned that he's from Flinders University, and I'm working at Flinders University. So I'm more than happy to respond, if that's okay.
Please.
Yeah. So I would like to say to Dylan, first of all, that I'm from the College of Nursing and Health Sciences at Flinders University. I'm working as a balanced position, which means senior lecturer and researcher. And I'm supervising PhD students. So for you to become a principal supervisor, I guess you need to follow the processes that we have in place at Flinders University. We have a very good and thorough way of becoming a principal supervisor. One of the requirements is that you're going to be an associate supervisor first. You're going to have a PhD completion, and then you will be a good candidate to become a principal, because I want you to learn and to see the whole process of how to, from the beginning till the end, how you have a HDR completion. And also if there are any challenges along the way, you will be able to understand better how to support your students. So you're learning through this journey, but also you will be able to be a good candidate. In order for you to become a principal supervisor, you also need to have experience, I would say. You will know what the process is in place. You will be able to understand better how to answer your student questions related to the progress, related to the confirmation of candidature, for example, things that you don't know when you just start the process. So better to be an associate supervisor first. Once you completed, then you can become a principal supervisor.
Thank you very much.
And another thing I would like to say is regarding, if that's okay, regarding the chat, I asked several questions regarding the workload, and that's related to your question before about my potential challenges with supervision of HDR students. So it's, from my point of view, it's also related to the workload model of each university. If the work model changed and the HDR supervisor are not getting, I would say, allocated workload to supervise HDR students, and they are expected to supervise HDR students out of their own research time, then most likely we will be able to see potentially a lower amount of HDR students that we would like to supervise in the future, because we don't want to, I would say, see a lower amount of research capacity in order to supervise HDR students. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hila. You actually raise a very important issue that I'd like to throw to the panel. I guess in many ways, we've talked about processes today, and yet within processes, there are structures that can inhibit some of the practices, even if we want to bring them on. How do workloads factor in, if at all, in ongoing thinking in your contexts, as Hila has raised?
Hi, Joe. May I go now?
Thanks, JP. I might just wait and ask the panel to address the question of workload, and then we'll come into you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
I can go. Yeah, it's difficult workload, right? So I think I put in the chat, we allocate 120 hours per candidate per year, split amongst the supervisory team. It's not enough. Everybody says it's not enough. Everybody recognizes it's not enough, but it's all they're going to get. It's a really difficult thing. Other people higher up in the university argue that it's more than enough, and that in fact it should be part of the research allocation, not specifically allocated. So I know other universities have a situation where HDR supervision fits under research workload. We have a specific category for HDR supervision, but I guess I'm old enough and have been in the dean's role long enough that I'm finding the conversations about workload to be, which are relatively new, to be so different to the way it used to be. So now there are so many more pressures on academics that workload is necessary. A workload model is necessary. And previously, supervision was just part of being an academic, and we didn't count hours. We just did the work. But I think now that we have workload models for very good reasons, I would like to see a consistent approach to how HDR supervision is treated across Australian universities in workload models, and it isn't consistent, and it's not. It's not equitable, I think. Just my view.
Thank you, Wendy. Any other thoughts from the panel on workload?
Yeah, look, workload doesn't really come into it for us, because the number of units that an associate might get if they were 40% would be the same as what a principal would get if they were 40% on the team. So it comes down more to how the supervision is split up between members of the team, and how that impacts on their workload. As I said, we do have a cap of eight students, not equivalent full-time load, but eight bodies that you can supervise as a principal advisor at any one time. But that is a little bit different to workload.
Thank you. Deb, anything to add?
No, I agree with Wendy. It's a difficult conversation, but I think, a really important one where we're aiming for excellence. When you under-allocate time, it's very difficult to achieve that. The other thing is, as we all know, supervisor panels get together, and not always do they operate in the way. Juniors are taking on much bigger roles. They're at poignant parts, times in their careers when they're trying to do their research, publish, all of those things, as well as engage in supervision. And sometimes they get given the lion's share job, and how, so inequity does become a real issue, and addressing that is problematic. There are lots of things that sit in that space.
Thank you. We are closing in on our final 5 minutes, and we have 3 questions to attend to. So we'll keep them focused if that's okay. JP, you've been waiting in the queue, so we'll go to you first, and then Monique and Kat. Thank you. Thanks, JP.
No, thank you so much, John. I know that this may be a bit early for me to ask, because I'm still a PhD student at ECU, but I'm beginning to consider my next steps in academia, so particularly the pathway toward becoming a principal supervisor. It seems, well, this webinar has been really good for me, because it seems the process is way more complex than I initially expected. Assuming that soon I hopefully secure a fixed term lecturer position or something, would that be sufficient to qualify as a HDR supervisor? So that was my initial thought, but I see that this differs across the universities in Australia. At the lecture level, though, does supervising undergraduate cadet students contribute meaningfully to some way to meeting like supervision criteria at the HDR level? I'm putting like this question to the panel, so any guidance for me at this level would be really appreciated. But if that could help me with that, because we are at the same university, that would be nice too. Thanks.
Thank you, JP.
Should I speak to that first?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's not that difficult to become an associate supervisor. You have to attend an induction, demonstrate research activity, and get on the register and find a team, a supervisor panel that you can become a member of. So that's not that challenging. And then there are the 2 pathways towards principal supervision, if you like. So associate supervision isn't, there are still criteria to meet, obviously, but there are just forms to fill out and meet the criteria, and you can, you know, have an associate supervisor role. Does that answer your question more?
It sounds like there's a good conversation to happen in an ongoing way there. So thank you.
Absolutely. Feel free to contact me.
Yeah, thanks, Deb. I'll contact you later. Thanks.
Yep.
Monique, you have typed your question for us all to see in there. It does concern pushback or disengagement from senior supervisors. Anything more to add to the question?
No, we've been sort of at Charles Sturt University, which is where I am, we've been reinvigorating our program with a view to make it more succinct and take less of their time, because we're finding that, yeah, in particular those who've been around for a while, they just don't want to engage with it. We've set up communities of practice for supervisors on both online platforms, on the campuses themselves, because we, like other universities, are spread all over the place. And also, as I say, the supervisor training program we've had for a while, the one through ACGR, but now we've sort of been building our own and working forward with that. And we just get, I mean, I guess that's one of my concerns, is no matter what we implement, how hard is it going to be to get people to come back and re-engage? And I can hear that some of you have got those sorts of programs that every 4 years or 5 years they must have done something else, and we'd like to do that sort of thing as well. So what are your thoughts on that?
I'm happy to jump in, John, if you want.
Thanks, Pierre.
We certainly do get pushback from the more entitled supervisors who think they know everything, and I guess we use a carrot and a stick approach. The stick is if you are not on the principal supervisor register because you haven't done your training, then you can't take on new students as a principal advisor. The carrot is similar to what Wendy's saying there in the chat, that we actually want them to be there and we encourage them to share their experience. And flattery gets you a long way. So some of them really do enjoy that. There's still a small percentage of people who will come to the session. It's interesting because we run them both online and face-to-face, but the face-to-face sessions, you can see them usually sitting up the back with their arms crossed and frowns on their faces. And within the first 15 minutes or so, they start to relax and start to contribute. So I find it quite interesting to see how their demeanor changes once they're there and you engage them and ask them to share their experience. But we certainly get pushback.
Yeah, thanks, Pierre. That sounds good.
Thank you very much to everyone for this really rich and wonderful conversation. We have talked about process structure. It definitely ended on a culture piece, which is really important. All of these issues really nested together on this really important issue of supervisor qualification, registration, ultimately academic duties of care to HDR candidates. And this is what we're here to discuss more specifically, I guess, from a motivational perspective. Thank you to everyone for joining us, and thanks, Tracy, for allowing me to facilitate this conversation, and over to you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for sharing the conversation, which I think everyone would agree was very engaging. I think this, the amount of questions and the hands up in the comments leads to us thinking about maybe continuing this conversation in another webinar later in the year. So on behalf of ACGR, thank you all for coming and spending your time with us. Thank you to John for chairing the panel, and thank you to Deb, Wendy and Pierre for giving your time as panellists. So thank you all, and enjoy the remainder of your Friday.